Hello and welcome to the introduction of Axcel ChartManagement. This is a Microsoft Excel file that uses VBA or macro programming and is designed for the use on board ships. It offers a route database in combination with an inventory list of onboard sea charts and is also capable of writing data into an embedded voyage planning form. I started to create this file back in 2007 and updated it several times, incorporating new features. The file is, to my knowledge, indeed still being used on board several ships worldwide, and in the following presentation I will go quickly through each individual worksheet to show what the program is actually capable of. Please excuse that I am running the file in a German version of Excel, but the file itself is completely in English. Okay, let's get started. The first worksheet is trip data, and this is basically the user interface for the route database. You have a departure port and an arrival port, and of course you have a departure date and time and an arrival date and time, and normally you have a pilot, so you have an associated river distance and also a river time for departure and for the arrival port. And given these data, the program can then of course calculate a required speed from pilot to pilot, and if I change something here in the values, then of course everything will be calculated dynamically as we would expect it from Excel. Looking at the river distance, you see that there is a comment here saying that this 14 nautical miles is in combination, in conjunction with this pilot station number 2, obviously, and it is sometimes necessary to specify certain things for this particular voyage, and that's why you have the possibility to attach a comment to several elements here in this form for the river distance, obviously, and also for the river time and for the departure time, and also of course for the arrival port, for the river distance, for the river time, and also for the arrival time, and also for the total distance. And you can do so by just clicking on this button here, this small button. You can enter a customized comment, and you can also just enter a standard comment, or of course you can delete a comment if there was one. And this is the way how you can just attach a remark to this item, and these comments, they are being transferred to the route database and of course also being retrieved once the trip is loaded into the form. Looking here onto the right, you have the list of the necessary charts necessary for this particular voyage leg, and you can see that all the charts are currently flagged green, which means that they are listed in the inventory list, and we can also see that they are currently listed in folio number 20. I will tell you a little bit more about these folios when I show you the inventory list. But if I navigate now through the database by clicking onto these buttons here, then you can see that the status is actually changing. It's not always green, and these two charts, for example, they have this red stripe pattern. And the red stripe pattern says that the chart is either on board but marked as not active, or that the chart is not yet on board, because you can assign an arrival and also an off-landing date for each chart, and if that arrival date is in the future, then the program knows that that particular chart is not yet on board or not on board at this very moment, and then it gets this red stripe pattern. And if I just enter any random number here, then you will see that this chart is getting this red flag saying that this chart is not listed in the inventory list at all. And of course I can make changes here in the list. I can insert charts and I can also delete charts. And so this is very useful. If you just click through your database, you can see if you have all the required charts on board, or whether you have something to do before you actually go on that trip. This gray box over here allows you to do an ETA calculation, and if you know the accumulated distance of a waypoint along the route, you can enter that distance here, and then you will see the ETA of that waypoint based on that required speed, which is calculated over here. And this is most of the time useful when it comes to knowing the time when the ship is going outside 12 miles and going back in 12 miles. Especially the engineers, they want to know this most of the time in advance. And during the voyage, of course, you will see that calculated on an axis, but sometimes it is actually quite useful to know that in advance already during the planning stage. And this is how you can calculate that ETA for a particular waypoint given that cumulated distance along the route. Looking at the buttons up here, we can see that we can load a trip, and this is also very easy. You can filter that list according to a specific departure port, but you can also filter that list according to any arrival port, and you can also highlight several items here in that list if they have certain values that you are looking for, which you can specify up here. Saving of a trip is also very easy. Pressing that button will give you several options. You can of course just overwrite the existing data. If you make any changes, you can just overwrite the values in the database. You can create a new trip appending it at the end of the database, or you can also just insert a new trip at this point where you are in the database. And also you have the possibility to save the entire Excel file every time you are storing something into the database. Inserting another trip would also be possible by clicking on that button over here, and these smaller buttons here, they bring you forward or back in the database by 10 trips each time you click this one. And so this is a way of navigating through the database a little bit faster. And the last button here is a very nice feature. It's the history function. You can access this function by pressing that button, toggle history. And if I click now on the arrival port cell, you will see that the history function will list all entries in the database relevant for that particular cell. And in this case, it looks for all entries that have the same port as a destination, as an arrival port. And I have to say that this box here can hold only a certain amount of characters, and it might be that there are actually more entries in the database, but you cannot see those just because of the limitation of the characters. So this is a very nice feature that allows you to quickly look up several values in the database. This works also for the river distance and also for the river time. Of course, the same for the arrival port, the river distance and the river time, and also the time zone. You can look up the time zone that was entered in the past, and also the total distance, provided that that exact combination is already in the database. And yeah, this is very useful if you are making your planning of your routes and you are not exactly sure what was the river distance of a particular port, for example. Then you can just quickly look it up in your database, and it gives you an idea what that particular information looks like. Going on to the next worksheet is the voyage plan, and at this stage I have to say that I do not take any guarantee that this voyage planning form is compliant with any regulation, ISM regulation, port state regulation, flag state regulation. All I can say is that this form worked very well in the past. Whenever there was a concern or a complaint, then this form was changed, and it was then changed to match this requirement. And it can happen still that this form needs to be changed, and you can do so because this worksheet is protected but without password. So whenever there's something that needs to be incorporated into this form, then you can just unprotect this sheet and make changes. You can insert columns, you can delete rows, whatever. So as I said, I do not take any guarantee that this form is actually compliant with any regulation. Nevertheless, it is quite useful and handy because you can navigate again through your database by clicking on these buttons here, and then the data will fill in automatically, at least the route specific data, because the officer is not relieved of entering additional information for that voyage leg. And of course there are several other data that need to be entered in here, but at least the officer can focus basically on the relevant things, and the program will help by filling in some of the route related information, so these information, they don't have to be entered twice, in other words. Next is the worksheet particulars, and this worksheet was designed to be printed out and then folded in the middle, and the officer who is in charge for preparing the voyage and also the paper charts can actually use this paper to mark that particular stack of sea charts that he prepared. And especially if there are several stacks of sea charts, then it is actually necessary to mark them, and this paper will give all the necessary information, of course also the chart sequence, and also other information relevant for that route. And depending on the way how that paper is being used and how that paper will be marking that stack, the user can actually choose between two font styles. One is flipped 1 by 180 degrees, but yeah, this is up to the user how this paper is then going to be applied to that particular stack of charts. Going on with the next worksheet, which is titled Charts All, and this, as the name suggests, holds all the charts which are on board. The list can hold several thousand charts, so it should be more than enough. And in the first column you obviously have the chart number followed by the folio number, and you can assign each chart to a folio just by clicking into the list and selecting the relevant chart folio. Altogether there are 20 folios available in Axcel ChartManagement, and this way you can easily assign each chart to one of them. Next is the column for the chart title. Most of the charts in here, they do actually have a chart title, but you don't necessarily have to enter that title. It's quite a lot of work of typing that one. And next comes the arrival date. You can specify a date when this chart is coming on board, and associated with it is also a date for off landing. And given these dates, the program can then see whether the chart is currently on board or not. And last in this list here is the column for the status, and you can have the active status, so the chart is active, or you can also flag the chart as not active. And the effect that it has I demonstrated earlier on the trip data worksheet. And of course you can sort this list according to whatever, according to the chart number, to the folio number, to the chart title, or also the arrival date, departure date, but typically it's sorted by the chart number. And looking at the other worksheets here, you see that these three, they have all the same color, saying that they are all dealing basically with the chart inventory list. And the next worksheet, which is titled Charts by Folios, is actually a worksheet that is interlinked with this Charts All, because it splits up all the charts into the individual folios. And if I want to change one chart to go into another folio, I can do so by just clicking that chart and the cell for the folio, and just change the folio number, and you will see that the chart has instantly moved into the other folio. And of course I can do the same in reverse. I can bring back that particular chart into this other folio, and I can do the same here in this chart list all. And if I change the status in here and go then to the charts by folios, you will see that this chart 83 is now in this folio number 2, and if I change that folio number back to 1, you will see that also the chart is now back in folio number 1. Once again, you can sort this list to whatever information. As I said, usually it's sorted by the chart number, and you can navigate through these folios by clicking on these buttons over here. And as you've seen earlier, the charts for a particular trip can be in one of these folios. These folios can be named individually, so you can assign one folio to hold all the charts which are going to be off-landed in the near future, or you can assign one folio to a certain region of the world, or you can also assign a folio to hold charts for the next chart order. So this is all up to the user. And if we look once again at this chart that we saw earlier in the list that had this red stripe pattern marking, then you can see that the origin of this for this chart was that this chart was marked as not active. And if I just quickly look for it, so here for example you can see that this 1402 in folio 20 has this red stripe pattern marking, and if I just change that one to yes, then you will see that the marking is gone. So 1402 is now flagged green. And the other thing was that down here there was a chart that had an arrival date in the future, so it was not on board, and that's why it also got that red stripe pattern. And if I removed that date, then it would also be marked as on board, and then the chart would be also flagged as green in the database. Right, next is the charts by trip worksheet, which allows you to gather all the required charts necessary for a voyage leg on one sheet. And all you have to do is basically enter the individual trip data number, the index kind of in the database, and then just go along with the sequence. There is actually a list here that suggests to follow the sequence. It just increases the number, this value by 1. And you don't have to stick to that sequence. You can enter just any number that you want. So for instance here, and you can then continue again from there. So it allows you to make your customized list of sea charts required. The markings on this sheet are very similar to the ones that I showed you earlier, only the green color is not included. So any white coloring or a lack of coloring kind of indicates that the chart is listed in the inventory list. This stripe pattern will tell you that the chart is either not active or not yet on board, and the red marking here will show you that this chart is currently not in the inventory list. And if a chart has this bold font, then this means that the chart is being used in the previous trip, or in other words in the previous column. And especially if you are preparing charts for a certain voyage leg, then most of the time it's these charts which are not bold that you can put in one stack, because all the other charts, they will be used in the previous trip and then be added shortly before you start the voyage. So this is again very handy function to see and compile all the necessary charts which are relevant for a specific trading area or for selected trips. Next one is the correction log. Every seafarer or at least the officer in charge for the sea charts has to update sea charts on a regular basis, and of course this needs to be logged. And what the officer needs is an up-to-date list of all the sea charts that are currently on board. And this is the purpose of this worksheet, the correction log. Pressing onto that button will go through the inventory list and gather all the charts which are currently on board for that particular time frame. There is a time frame of 6 weeks which starts from a specific date, which you can enter up here. and if that C chart is coming on board in that time frame, it will get this marking over here, and if that C chart is leaving the ship or getting being off-landed during that time frame, then it will get these stripes here, these diagonal markings here, indicating that this chart will not be on board from that moment on or from that week on. And if this off-landing would have taken place weeks or months ago, then this chart of course would not be listed at all, because this chart is not relevant for that particular time frame that you're looking at. And once you have all your charts gathered, then the idea of this list is that the officer can then enter the number of the chart correction that he applied for that particular chart just by hand, which always makes a good impression during port state controls or also flag state controls. And this is the purpose of the correction log. And speaking of chart corrections, the next worksheet is Correction Compare. And this allows you to highlight those charts in your inventory list that are affected by a chart correction published in the weekly notices to mariners. And looking here onto the left, you see that this column here contains all the relevant charts for that particular time frame. This is the one that we just created on the worksheet correction log. And the table here on the right is empty and is supposed to contain the information from the PDF file that you have to download from the internet. This is the one, the Admiralty Notices to Mariners. That's a weekly publication. And if you just go to the page where the charts are listed that are affected, the index of charts affected it's called, and you just have to select and copy this list with Control C and bring it into the Excel file. You have to go here to the first cell, and then Control V will paste that data into that table, and the program will automatically split up the information. And the first column here is the chart number, and the other cells, the other columns here, they are the actual number of the chart correction. And you can see by the color coding that these charts are matching with your inventory list, and these charts, they actually need to be corrected. That color coding is here in this list coming from the PDF file, but also the marking here in your own inventory list. And yeah, this way you don't have to go through that PDF file manually and check which charts actually need a correction or not. Next is the Fourier Overview, and this one lets you compile the C charts in a clearly arranged format, and can also highlight charts having certain criteria which you can specify in the table on the left here. And the first thing that you have to specify is basically how that highlighting is going to look like, whether you just want the chart number to be highlighted or only the folio number, or basically the entire row of that particular table. And this is basically the setting right now. And in this example, I want to highlight all the charts which are not active, and on top of that I also like to highlight this folio number 5, let's say. And to make it a little bit more interesting, I will also exclude one folio. Let's take this folio number 14. And once everything is done, you can press this button, Generate Overview, and then the program will go into the inventory list and compile all the relevant charts, and of course make also the highlighting. And of course it will stick to the highlighting settings here in this particular cell. So if you don't like that yellow, for example, you could go ahead, you could click that cell and change the background color before running that running the program, before going to that generate overview function. If you change that in before you do that, then of course also your marking will look differently. So now the program is finished, and it has made all the relevant markings and highlightings here in the list. It has excluded this folio number 14, as you can see, and this way you could go ahead and print it out. The overview would look like this if you printed it out, and it's very nicely arranged, and you could just then print out the sheet range that you actually want to see. And another very nice thing is this summary of all your chart folios. You can see how many charts are listed in each particular folio, and also of course you can see the total amount of charts, how many charts are not active and things like that. And looking through the list of all the charts, then sometimes you will see that there are charts here which are highlighted in a special way. So this blue color here with a stripe is indicating that these charts are listed twice or several times. And looking closer, it appears that these are several sheets, so it is actually correct having these numbers several times in here, but most of the time it's actually by mistake that charts are being entered twice, and that's why it's actually quite nice to see that color coding, that highlighting, so that you can check on that and see whether it is actually correct or not. Now, so that is the worksheet folio overview. We will carry on now with the next worksheet, which is called print, and this worksheet allows you just to quickly select a folio or a certain set of charts, and it will just take it from the list and fill into this table. You can send it to the printer, or you can just export it into a separate Excel file. We will carry on now with the next worksheet, which is trip database, and this is basically the core, or the heart of the whole program, because this is, as the name suggests, the database, the route database, and all routes are basically stored in one of these lines here. So all the data is being put into that line, and this goes on for quite a while here. There's a lot of information that is being put here, and most important is that this first column here, the leg number, which is basically the index, maybe you know that from any database function like access, this index here needs to be uninterrupted, and incremented always by 1. And it's very important that this sequence is uninterrupted, and what also should be uninterrupted is of course the sequence of ports, and you can check that by clicking on that button over here, and then you can see that there are some inconsistencies here in your database. So in other words, your departure port does not match with the previous arrival port, and by highlighting that you have the possibility to go through it and to correct it where necessary. And there was a box here at the beginning saying that this worksheet is not protected to allow easy editing. So that's really what it is. It is a database which can be edited, so there's no protection involved here, but of course you should know what you are doing. There are no formulas contained in here. It's just plain data that is being entered here, and you can insert rows, you can delete rows, but for sure you should not insert any columns or delete any columns, because then the program is not able to function correctly anymore, because it works with this specific columns, and it knows exactly where to place each information, and that's why it would not work if you delete or insert columns in that database. And if you want to export your route related information, you can do so on the worksheet titled Export Itinerary, and this is basically the format that is going to be used as an itinerary. And if you want to fill that template with your route information, you just have to click on that button here on the top left, and then the user form will ask you whether you want to export the whole year or just a specific month, or a custom time range which you can specify down here. I will just select a certain month here, June maybe, and then I will include all the cell comments, and I like to color the commented cells if they contain a cell comment, just to make it a little bit more obvious. And I want to export that into a separate Excel file, and then I just click that button OK, and then the file and then the information will be transferred into a completely new workbook. As you can see, this is a completely different workbook, and then you can go ahead and make all the changes that you want. You can insert columns, rows, whatever, and you have all the relevant data here. You have all your ports in that particular time frame, and arrival, departure times, your pilot times, and associated distances. And this is actually quite a very nice and presentable format for a schedule, I think. And another way of exporting data in a different format is the day by day, and the same principle applies. You just click that button in the top left corner, and once again you can select the whole year or just a specific month. And I will select this June again. And this time around I don't want to export into a separate Excel file, just want to contain it within this worksheet, and then the data will be collected and transferred into that form. And you can see here very clearly that the ship is overnight somewhere here, for example, and also if the ship has several ports in one day, this can also be clearly seen. And that's basically it. That's the function of Axcel chart management. The last sheet here in this workbook is basically just a simple help file giving a few more explanations of things that I already mentioned. And if you're interested, then you can go on my website www.axcel.webspace.rocks, and you can download the file for free. And you can, of course, send me an email and tell me what you think. I'm always interested to hear your thoughts and your comments and your feedback. And that's it from my side, and I like to thank you for your attention.